It was supposed to be a quiet evening. The kind of night where the world outside barely made a sound, where an old man could sit in his favorite chair, listen to the ticking of the clock, and feel safe inside his own home. But that night, something wasn't right. James Holloway, an 82-year-old veteran, had lived in his neighborhood for over 40 years. He had seen it change, watched families come and go, and always did his best to keep an eye out for his neighbors. But lately, something had been making him uneasy. He had heard noises at odd hours, footsteps crunching outside his window, the creak of his front porch when no one was supposed to be there. At first, he chalked it up to his imagination. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe he was just getting old. But tonight, there was no mistaking it. A shadow moved past his window. Slow, careful, watching. James' heart pounded in his chest. He reached for the phone with a shaking hand and dialed 911. His voice was steady, but there was a weight in it, a tiredness, a fear he hadn't felt since his days in the service. "There's someone outside my house," he told the dispatcher. "I think they're trying to break in." The officer arrived within minutes. A young cop, Officer Daniels, who had only been on the force a couple of years but had already seen his fair share of late-night calls. He pulled up to the house, scanning the yard with his flashlight, one hand resting on his holster. At first, everything seemed normal. No sign of forced entry, no movement in the yard. But then, as he stepped onto the porch, he noticed something strange. The front door was slightly open. "Mr. Holloway?" Officer Daniels called out, pushing the door wider. The house was dark, except for the dim glow of a lamp in the living room. He took a step inside, his boot making a faint thud on the wooden floor. "It's the police. You called about a possible break-in." Silence. Then, a noise from deeper in the house. A rustling sound, followed by a low, almost inaudible whisper. Officer Daniels reached for his radio, his instincts on high alert. He moved cautiously down the hallway, following the sound. The veteran's house was small but filled with memories. Framed photos of a younger James in uniform, a few medals displayed proudly on the shelf, old books stacked neatly on a table. Everything seemed in place, except for one thing. The back door was wide open. Daniel's pulse quickened. He turned, shining his light toward the hallway leading to the bedroom. That's when he saw it. A pair of eyes staring at him from the darkness. For a split second, he thought it was an intruder. But as he stepped closer, his breath caught in his throat. The truth was far worse than a simple break-in. And what he discovered that night would change everything. Officer Daniels tightened his grip on his flashlight, his heart pounding as he took a cautious step forward. The figure in the darkness didn't move, didn't make a sound. The beam of light flickered slightly as it finally illuminated the face in front of him. It was James Holloway. The elderly veteran stood there, his eyes wide, his hands trembling at his sides. His breath was shallow, his skin pale beneath the dim glow of the flashlight. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. "Mr. Holloway," Daniels said, lowering his voice to a steady, calming tone. "It's me, Officer Daniels. You called for help." James blinked a few times as if trying to process what was happening. Then, his lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He was frozen. The officer stepped closer, keeping his movements slow and careful, not wanting to startle the old man. "Are you hurt?" Daniels asked. "Is someone here with you?" James swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he tried to form words. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "It's not safe." Daniels felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something in the way James spoke, the fear in his voice. It wasn't just about a burglar. This was something else, something deeper. The officer cast another quick glance around the room. Everything looked normal on the surface. No broken glass, no overturned furniture, no obvious sign of a struggle. But then he noticed something small, something out of place. On the floor near James' feet was an old, leather-bound book. It was open, its pages worn and yellowed with time. The handwriting inside was small and neat, but the ink looked smudged as if someone had touched it with shaking hands. Daniels pointed to the book. "Is this yours?" James hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, he nodded. "What is it?" Daniels pressed. James exhaled shakily and slowly bent down, picking up the book with careful hands. His fingers brushed over the pages as if the words inside carried a heavy weight. "It's my journal," he finally admitted. Daniels frowned. "A journal?" That wasn't what he expected. "Did you write something in it tonight?" James didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned the book slightly, angling it so that Daniels could see the most recent entry. The ink was still fresh, the words hurriedly scrawled as if they had been written in a rush. "He's back. I don't know how, but he's back. I hear him at night, watching, waiting. I don't have much time." A chill ran through Daniels. He looked from the journal to James, trying to make sense of what he was reading. "Who's back?" James' hands tightened around the book. His breathing grew uneven. "I don't know," he whispered. "Or maybe I do. Maybe I just don't want to admit it." Daniels wasn't sure how to respond to that. He had walked into this house expecting a simple burglary call, maybe even a case of paranoia from an elderly man living alone. But this was something else entirely. He needed more information. "Mr. Holloway, let's sit down for a second. Tell me what's going on." James hesitated, glancing toward the open back door as if expecting to see someone standing there. When he finally turned back to Daniels, there was something hollow in his expression, something deeply unsettled. "I never told anyone this," he started, his voice low, almost shaky. "Not even my family. Not my neighbors. No one." Daniels sat across from him, watching carefully. James ran a hand over his face, then exhaled. "Back when I was in the service, I had a friend. His name was William Carter. We enlisted together, went through everything side by side. But during a mission overseas, something happened. Something terrible." He paused, his fingers tightening around the edge of his journal. "We were caught in an ambush. I made it out. He didn't." Daniels remained silent, letting him continue. James' voice dropped even lower, almost like he was afraid of being overheard. "Or at least that's what I thought. We never recovered his body. We assumed he was gone, lost to the war. But years later, I started getting letters. No return address, no explanation, just letters in his handwriting. He talked about things only he and I would know, things from our past, memories. And then he started talking about coming back." Daniels felt an uneasy sensation settle in his chest. "Are you saying you think?" "I don't know what I'm saying," James interrupted, his voice edged with frustration and fear. "I don't know what to believe anymore. But I do know one thing. Ever since those letters stopped, I've felt like I was being watched." And now, his voice broke slightly. "Now I hear him." Daniels studied the man in front of him. His fear was real, there was no doubt about that. Whether it was a ghost from his past, a trick of the mind, or something else entirely, James truly believed that something or someone was watching him. A gust of wind blew through the open back door, making the old curtains sway slightly. Daniels turned his head instinctively, his hand resting on his holster. The night outside was quiet, but there was something unsettling about the way the darkness stretched just beyond the doorway. "I need to check the house," Daniels finally said, standing up. "I'll take a look around. Make sure no one's here." James didn't stop him. He just sat there, clutching his journal tightly, staring at the floor like a man trapped in his own mind. Daniels moved carefully, his flashlight cutting through the dim light as he made his way down the hall. He checked the small kitchen, the tiny laundry room, even the closets. Nothing seemed out of place. But when he stepped into the bedroom, something caught his eye. The window was open, just a crack. It could have been nothing. Maybe James had left it that way. But Daniel's gut told him otherwise. He stepped closer, inspecting the lock. That's when he saw it. A single footprint on the wooden floor. Not old, not faded, fresh. Someone had been inside this house. And whoever it was, they might still be close. Daniels felt his pulse quicken as he crouched down, studying the footprint on the wooden floor. It wasn't large, just the right size for an average man's shoe. The print was slightly smudged, as if someone had stepped in cautiously, then hesitated. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with something unspoken. Someone had been inside this house, and if James hadn't seen them come in or leave, they might still be close. He reached for his radio, but hesitated before pressing the button. Something about this didn't feel like a typical break-in. If this was just a burglar, why hadn't they taken anything? The TV was still in place. The cabinets were untouched. Even James' military medals and keepsakes, things that might hold real value to a thief, remained exactly where they belonged. Daniel stood up, scanning the room again, his instincts sharp. He had learned to trust them over the years. The footprint near the window suggested someone had entered through here, but the open back door told a different story. Had they come back in? Were they watching? Waiting? He stepped out of the bedroom, his boots barely making a sound against the floor. In the living room, James was still sitting in his chair, gripping his journal with both hands. His eyes had a distant look, like his mind was somewhere else. Somewhere far away. "Mr. Holloway," Daniel said, keeping his voice even. "Did you have this window open earlier?" James slowly looked up, his expression unreadable. Then, after a pause, he shook his head. "No," he said, voice hoarse. "I haven't opened that window in weeks." Daniels nodded, his suspicion confirmed. He needed backup. He was about to call it in when James spoke again. "I can feel it," the old man murmured, almost to himself. "I don't know how, but I can feel when he's near." Daniels frowned. "Who?" James swallowed, then turned the journal to a page further back, one filled with neat, careful handwriting. He traced a finger over the words, then read them aloud. "The letters keep coming. He says he forgives me. But how can he? He was the one who—" James stopped, his breath hitching. Daniels leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Holloway, what happened back then? What really happened to William Carter?" James shut the journal abruptly, his fingers pressing hard into the worn cover. He looked at Daniels with an expression that was equal parts fear and guilt. "There's something I never told anyone," James said quietly. "Something I never even wrote down." He took a shaky breath. "Carter didn't die in the ambush." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" James' hands trembled slightly as he set the journal down on the table beside him. "We were pinned down. The gunfire wouldn't stop. We were losing men fast. Carter was hit badly. He was bleeding out, and we didn't have time. The others, they had already started falling back. I had a choice to make." His voice cracked. "I could carry him, slow everyone down, and risk all of us getting killed. Or I could leave him." A heavy silence filled the room. James shut his eyes for a moment, his jaw tightening. "I told myself he wouldn't have made it, that it was the only choice. But in the back of my mind, I've always wondered, what if I was wrong? What if he survived?" His eyes lifted to Daniels. "What if he's the one who's been watching me?" Daniels didn't respond right away. He knew war left wounds deeper than just the ones on the surface. Guilt, regret, they could haunt a man for a lifetime. But this was different. If James was telling the truth, there was a real possibility that someone, maybe even William Carter himself, was still out there. And if that was the case, why had they waited so long to come back? The wind rattled the back door slightly, making it creak. Daniel's muscles tensed. He stood and moved toward the open doorway, his hand brushing against his holster. He stepped outside into the cool night air, scanning the yard. The streetlights cast long shadows over the pavement, stretching out like dark fingers. The yard was empty, but something fell off. Daniels crouched down near the back steps, running his fingers lightly over the dirt. There, another footprint, this one partially covered by scattered leaves. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry, and yet he still couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He stood up slowly, turning his gaze toward the tree line at the edge of the property. The darkness was thick, almost impenetrable, but just as he was about to turn away, something caught his eye, a faint glimmer like the reflection of light against glass. Daniel stiffened. Someone was there. He reached for his radio, pressing the button this time. "Dispatch, this is Officer Daniels. I need a second unit at my location. Possible intruder in the area." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Officer Daniels. Backup on the way." He kept his eyes on the tree line, waiting, listening. The seconds felt stretched, each one heavier than the last. Then, finally, movement. A shadow shifting between the trees. Daniels took a slow step forward, his voice steady. "This is the police. Step out where I can see you." Silence. Then, another movement. This time, faster. Whoever was out, there wasn't planning on sticking around. Daniels took off toward the trees, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He pushed past the brush, his breath steady as he scanned the area. But by the time he reached the spot where the figure had been, they were gone. Only one thing remained: a single, folded piece of paper wedged between the roots of an old tree. Daniels bent down, unfolding it carefully. The paper was slightly damp from the evening air, but the words inside were still clear. It was a letter. "James, I told you I'd find you." Daniel's grip tightened. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching. They were playing a game, and James Holloway was right in the center of it. Daniel stared at the letter, his fingers tightening around the damp paper. His pulse was steady, but his mind raced. Someone had been here, someone who knew James, someone who had been waiting for the right moment. The words on the page felt like a warning, or worse, a promise. He turned back toward the house, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. James was still inside, unaware of what Daniels had just found. The night air was eerily silent, except for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. But Daniels knew better. Silence didn't always mean safety. He moved quickly, stepping back through the open back door, his boots making soft thuds against the wooden floor. James looked up, his eyes searching Daniels' face for answers. But Daniels didn't speak right away. He wasn't sure how much to tell him. Then James' gaze dropped to the paper in Daniel's hand. His face paled. "Where did you get that?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniels watched him carefully. "It was outside, near the trees." He hesitated. "James, this was left for you." The old man swallowed hard, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair. He stared at the letter like it held something much heavier than ink on paper. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, his lips parted, and he whispered, "It's him." Daniels frowned. "You don't know that for sure." James' eyes flickered with something unreadable. Fear, regret, maybe even a hint of certainty. "It's him," he repeated, firmer this time. "Carter." Daniels exhaled, his mind running through every possibility. He still wasn't convinced. The idea that a man who had supposedly died decades ago had returned didn't sit right with him. But there was something real happening here, something dangerous. He needed more information. "James," Daniels said carefully, "if Carter really survived, why would he come back now? After all these years?" James let out a slow, shaky breath. "I don't know." He ran a hand down his face, his fingers pressing against his temples. "Maybe he was waiting. Maybe he wanted me to feel safe before he didn't finish. He didn't need to." The unspoken words hung in the air. Daniels was about to press further when the sound of a car pulling up outside made both men freeze. "Back up," Daniels exhaled, moving toward the front door. He stepped outside, meeting Officer Riley, a veteran cop with years of experience. She was sharp, level-headed, and didn't scare easily. But as soon as she stepped out of the car, she took one look at Daniels' face and knew something wasn't right. "What's going on?" she asked. Daniels handed her the letter. She read it quickly, her jaw tightening. "Someone's messing with him," she said, looking up at the house. "You think it's a prank? Maybe someone from the neighborhood trying to scare him?" Daniels shook his head. "No, this is personal." Riley studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's check the area. If someone's still out there, they won't get far." The two officers split up, moving carefully around the property. Daniels took the backyard again, his flashlight sweeping over every inch of the ground, searching for any signs of movement. Riley moved toward the street, scanning the sidewalks and alleyways. Minutes passed. Nothing. Whoever had been here was gone. But then, just as Daniels was about to turn back, something caught his attention. A sound. Faint. Almost imperceptible. Breathing. Daniels turned sharply, his hand instinctively going to his holster. His eyes locked onto the old storage shed near the back of the yard. It was small, barely big enough for tools and a few boxes. But the door was slightly open. The breath he had heard, it had come from inside. He moved slowly, cautiously. The last thing he wanted was to spook whoever, or whatever, was in there. He reached the door, pausing for a brief second before pushing it open. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness. And then, a figure lunged. Daniels barely had time to react. The shadow crashed into him, knocking him back a step. His training kicked in immediately. He steadied himself, reached for his weapon, but before he could pull it, the figure was already retreating. Daniels got a glimpse, just a glimpse, of a man. A man in dark clothing, moving fast. But there was something else. The man was limping. Daniels didn't hesitate. He took off after him, shouting, "Stop! Police!" The figure didn't stop. He moved quickly despite the limp, disappearing into the shadows of the neighborhood. Daniels kept running, his adrenaline pumping. The man was fast, but Daniels was faster. He was gaining on him. Another few steps, another second, and then, just like that, the figure was gone. Daniels skidded to a stop, scanning the area. The street was empty. No sign of movement. It was like the man had vanished into thin air. But Daniels knew what he had seen. This wasn't a ghost. This was real. He turned back, breathing hard, his mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but something was still missing. And then he realized. The limp, the letters, the footprints. James had been right about one thing. Whoever was out there wasn't just watching. They were coming for him. And fast. Daniels stood in the middle of the street, his breath steadying as his mind replayed what had just happened. The man had been there, right in front of him. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. It wasn't possible. There had been nowhere for him to run. No cars, no open doors, no alleyways deep enough to disappear into. And yet, Daniels was standing here alone, the night pressing in around him, the air thick with something unspoken. He turned back toward the house, his gut telling him something was wrong. The encounter had been too brief, too calculated. Whoever this was, they weren't just running. They were leading him away. And then it hit him. James! Daniels broke into a run, his heart pounding as he sprinted back to the house. He barely noticed Riley emerging from the other side of the property, her flashlight sweeping the area as she called out to him. He didn't slow down. He reached the porch in seconds, shoving open the front door. The house was quiet. Too quiet. "James!" Daniels called, his voice firm. No answer. He stepped inside cautiously, his hand resting near his holster. The living room was empty. The old chair where James had been sitting just minutes ago was still rocking slightly, as if someone had left in a hurry. Daniel's eyes swept the room, his mind moving faster than his body. The journal was still on the table. The back door was closed. Then he saw it. The hallway light was flickering. Daniels moved toward it slowly, his pulse hammering in his ears. The door to James' bedroom was ajar, swaying slightly as if caught in a breeze that wasn't there. He reached out, pushing it open with the tip of his fingers. The room was empty. James was gone. Daniels took a slow breath, forcing himself to think. His training had taught him to stay calm, to assess, to react only when necessary. But this wasn't just another case. Someone had taken an old man from his own home, without a sound, without a struggle. And the worst part? James had been waiting for it. Daniel's radio crackled. Riley's voice came through, tense. "Daniels, I found something. You need to see this." He turned on his heel and hurried outside, where Riley was standing near the side of the house, her flashlight fixed on something in the grass. As he got closer, he felt a cold chill settle over him. It was another note. This one was different. The paper was older, the ink slightly faded. But the handwriting, sharp, deliberate, was unmistakable. "You left me once. I wonder how it feels now." Daniels clenched his jaw. His mind raced back to James' words. Carter didn't die in the ambush. Had he been alive all this time, waiting for the perfect moment? And if so, why now? Riley shifted beside him. "This guy's playing with him," she muttered. "With us." Daniels nodded, his grip tightening around the paper. "And he's not done yet." They moved fast, checking every inch of the property, searching for any sign of James. But there was nothing, no struggle, no footprints leading away. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. And then, just as Daniels was about to call for backup, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. His gut told him not to answer, but he did anyway. He pressed the phone to his ear. "Daniels." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a voice. Low, steady, familiar. "You should have stopped looking, officer." Daniel's breath hitched. His grip on the phone tightened. Where is he? A pause. Then, something that sent ice through his veins. Soft breathing. But not just from the caller. Someone else was there. Breathing shakily. Muffled. James. Daniel's jaw locked. If you hurt him. The voice cut him off, still calm, almost amused. This isn't about hurting him. It's about making him understand. Daniels forced himself to stay level. Understand what? The line crackled. Then, the price of being left behind. The call went dead. Daniels lowered the phone slowly, his fingers stiff, his mind running through every possible scenario. James was alive. But for how long? Riley watched him carefully. That was him, wasn't it? Daniels nodded. He has James. She didn't hesitate. We need to track the call. Daniels was already moving. They had to act fast. Because whoever this was, they weren't finished. And neither was he. Daniels gripped the steering wheel tightly as the patrol car tore down the empty road, the flashing lights reflecting off the trees that lined the old highway. Riley was beside him, focused, scanning the area as they followed the only lead they had, the location ping from the last call. It was on the outskirts of town, a place that didn't show up on many maps. An abandoned property, long forgotten. But someone had been waiting there. The moment they turned onto the gravel road, Daniel's gut tightened. The house came into view, an old two-story structure with broken windows and a sagging porch, barely standing against the wind. It was the kind of place that had been left behind, much like the man they were looking for. Daniels killed the engine, and the silence that followed was almost deafening. He and Riley stepped out cautiously, hands hovering near their weapons. The air was thick, heavy, as if it carried the weight of everything that had led to this moment. And then, a sound. A faint creak from inside the house. Daniels moved first, his steps measured but quick as he approached the front door. Riley covered his flank. The door wasn't locked. It groaned as it swung open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. They entered slowly. The air smelled of dust, wood rot, and something else. Something old, like time had stopped moving inside these walls. The floorboards creaked beneath their weight as they moved deeper into the house. Then, from the shadows, a voice. I knew you'd come. Daniel stopped. His flashlight cut through the dark, landing on a figure standing near the back of the room. A man, older, lean, a face lined with years of something hard, something unfinished. His clothes were dark, faded, but what stood out was the limp. The same limp Daniels had seen that night outside James' house. It was him, Carter. He stood there, his expression unreadable, his hands loose at his sides. And at his feet, James, tied to a chair, breathing but weak, his head slumped forward. Daniels didn't hesitate. Step away from him. Carter let out a small, almost bitter laugh. I waited decades for this moment. And you want to rush it? Daniels kept his voice level. This isn't the way. Carter's gaze flickered. Isn't it? He tilted his head slightly. You weren't there, officer. You don't know what it's like to be abandoned. To be left to rot in a place where no one comes for you. James stirred slightly at the words, his breathing uneven. Daniels took a careful step forward. You don't have to do this. Carter's fingers twitched. James does. Daniels exchanged a glance with Riley. They were close, but one wrong move could send everything spiraling. And then Carter moved. Not toward James. Not toward them, but toward the old table against the wall. Daniels reached for his weapon, but before he could draw, Carter grabbed something. A stack of papers, yellowed with age. He tossed them onto the floor between them. Read it. His voice was sharp cold. Daniels hesitated, then crouched, lifting one of the papers. His eyes scanned the faded ink. Reports. Documents. Official statements from decades ago. And then he saw it. Carter's name. Not under deceased. Under missing. His stomach dropped. Carter hadn't died in that mission. He had been left behind. And no one had come for him. James stirred again, his voice barely above a whisper. I tried. Carter's eyes darkened. Not hard enough. Daniel's mind raced. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about the truth. About a man erased from history, left with nothing but a name on an old piece of paper. And now, he was making sure someone remembered. Daniels tightened his grip. We can fix this. Carter's jaw clenched. It's too late for that. For a moment, Silence filled the space between them. Then James shifted, his voice weak but clear. "I never forgot you." Carter froze. His breathing hitched, his expression flickering, just for a second. And in that second, Daniels moved. Fast. Controlled. Before Carter could react, Daniels was on him, securing his arms, moving him away from James. Riley followed, quick and precise, ensuring there was no struggle. Carter didn't fight. Not really, because for the first time, someone had acknowledged what had happened to him. The weight of it settled into the room. Daniels exhaled, glancing at James, who was watching Carter with something heavy in his eyes, something close to regret. It was over, or at least it should have been. But as Daniels walked Carter out of the house, the older man turned his head slightly, just enough for Daniels to hear his final words. "This isn't about me." Daniels frowned. "What do you mean?" Carter's lips curled into the faintest smirk. "There were others." And just like that, the weight of the moment shifted again. Daniels felt it in his chest, the realization, the deeper truth. This wasn't just about James and Carter. This was bigger, and it wasn't over. Daniels walked Carter toward the patrol car, his grip firm but not forceful. The night air was thick, heavy with something unsaid. Carter didn't resist. He moved steadily, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the trees. For a man who had spent years waiting for revenge, he looked tired, not defeated but resigned. Riley stood by the car, her expression unreadable as she opened the door. Carter paused just before getting in and turned his head slightly toward Daniels. "You think locking me up changes anything?" His voice was low, almost reflective. Daniels met his gaze. "It's not about changing the past. It's about stopping the cycle." Carter let out a small exhale, something between a laugh and a sigh. "You don't stop something like this. You just delay it." Then, quieter, "You don't even know what you stepped into, do you?" Daniels didn't respond. He just watched as Carter lowered himself in the back seat. The door shut with a finality that settled deep in his chest. Inside the house, James was still seated, his hands now free, rubbing his wrist where the rope had cut into his skin. His face looked older, more worn than before, as if years of memories had caught up with him in one night. Daniels crouched in front of him. "You okay?" James gave a small nod, but his eyes stayed on the floor. "I knew this day would come," he said, voice thick. "Didn't know how, didn't know when, but I knew." He let out a slow breath. "And he's right." Daniels frowned. "About what?" James' fingers traced the worn edges of his chair. It wasn't just him. He finally looked up, his gaze steady. They left others behind, too. The weight of the words settled between them. The realization of something bigger, something buried under years of silence. Daniels had seen cases that felt unfinished before. Loose ends, stories that never got full closure. But this was different. James sighed. "I tried to speak up back then. Wrote letters. Made calls. No one listened. You know what they called me? A man with a bad memory." He scoffed. "But I never forgot." Daniel studied him. There was pain in James' voice, but also something else, something that had kept him going all these years. Riley stepped inside, giving them both a look. "They're taking Carter in. He's not talking anymore." Daniels expected as much. Carter had said all he needed to say. Now it was on them to figure out the rest. James slowly stood, his body stiff from the hours in that chair. He looked at the two officers, then toward the darkened hallway of his house. "You should check the study," he said finally. "Bottom drawer. Left side." Daniels and Riley exchanged a glance before moving toward the room. The study was small, lined with bookshelves filled with aging records and military memorabilia. Daniels spotted the desk James had mentioned and crouched down, pulling open the drawer. Inside were stacks of old papers, reports, letters. Some faded, others still crisp, but all of them carried the same unsettling thread. Names, dates, missions that had gone wrong, soldiers marked as missing, but never searched for. Daniels picked up one of the files, his eyes scanning the details. It wasn't just one case. It wasn't just Carter. Riley exhaled sharply as she looked over his shoulder. "This is bigger than we thought." James' voice came from behind them. "I held on to those because I figured one day someone would need to see them." His eyes locked onto Daniels. "And now you have." Daniels felt the weight of it, the responsibility. The truth had been buried for decades, forgotten by those who wanted to move on. But some wounds don't heal just because time passes. Some wounds stay open, waiting for someone to notice. James sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I never wanted revenge. I just wanted the truth to matter. Daniels nodded, carefully closing the drawer. It does. They left the house as the first light of dawn began creeping over the horizon. Carter was gone, taken into custody, but his words still lingered in Daniel's mind. There were others. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As Daniel stepped onto the porch, he looked back at James, who stood in the doorway, his figure framed by the dim glow of the house lights. Will you be all right? Daniels asked. James gave a small, tired smile. I've been all right for a long time. He nodded toward the papers in Daniel's hand. The question is, what are you going to do now? Daniels didn't have an answer. Not yet. But as he and Riley got into the car, the weight of those files on the seat between them, he knew one thing for certain. Some truths refused to stay buried. And this was just the beginning.